Welcome to Accounting in Focus. So, this is an issue that a lot of students have when they're learning variable and fixed cost. So, I wanted to look at variable and fixed costs on a per unit level and then what happens to those costs as production changes. So, again, I think this is a really good illustration to help you understand the difference between a variable cost and a fixed cost. So, the problem that we have, it says for 10,000 units, the variable cost per unit is $2 and the fixed cost per unit is $2. Okay, so expressed as a unit cost, both the variable cost and the fixed cost are $2. Okay, so that's 2 and that's 2. What is the total cost to produce 20,000 units? And what is the cost per unit for 20,000 units? So let's think about what a variable cost is. So a variable cost is a cost that varies. Okay, it is variable in total. Okay, so let's put that in there, in total. Okay, so what that means is that a variable cost is going to increase. Let's put this over here. A variable cost is going to increase as production increases. Okay, so that's your variable. Let's mark that with a V. Now with a fixed cost is fixed in total. Fixed in total. Okay, so then what does that mean? So that way with a fixed cost, the total cost as your production changes, my cost is going to stay the same. So that's a fixed cost. Okay, so you've got to keep that in mind that the total cost for a variable cost is going to change, but the total cost for a fixed cost is fixed. Okay, so even though we're expressing these in unit cost, you've got to think about the bigger picture, that what's happening. Okay, because this is only valid for 10,000 units. Okay, this is not going to be valid for 20,000 units necessarily. Okay, so first let's look at the total cost to produce 10,000 units. Okay, so my variable cost is $2 per unit. So let's switch back to this, talk about variable. Okay, so let's say variable. My variable cost for 10,000 units. Okay, so I'm going to take my cost per unit, so it's $2 per unit, times 10,000. So 2 times 10,000 is $20,000. 20,000. Okay, so now let's look at what happens with our fixed cost. So my fixed cost, remember fixed cost is fixed in total, but we're saying for 10,000 units, my fixed cost is $2 per unit, so that's also going to be $20,000. Okay, so my total cost is 40,000. And my cost per unit for 10,000 units, so if you take 40,000 and you divide it by 10,000 units, $4 per unit. Okay, that's pretty straightforward, and most of my students, they can do that, and nobody seems to have a problem with that. The problem comes when I say, okay, now let's do the cost for 20,000 units. Okay, this is where we start to have the problem. So here we go. So we say, okay, my variable cost is easy. That is $2 per unit times 20,000 units. Variable cost is $40,000. Right? Easy. Okay, fixed cost. So fixed cost is $2 per unit times 20,000 units, and that is 40,000. But wait a minute, that's different than 10,000, and we said fixed costs are fixed in total, right? So it doesn't matter if I'm at 10,000 units or 20,000 units. the cost should be the same. Well, that doesn't make any sense now, does it? So actually, what you've got to think to yourself is when you look at this problem, you got to wait a minute. This is fixed in total, so this isn't 40,000. This should be 20,000 because fixed cost is fixed in total. So my fixed cost is 20,000, not 40,000. Okay, so my total cost to make 20,000 units, okay, total cost is 60,000. See where I got that from? So the 40 for variable plus the 20 for fixed, that's 60,000. So now my cost per unit, if I take 60,000 divided by 20,000 units, my cost per unit is actually $3. So my cost per unit is dropping the more units I make, because remember, this fixed cost is not going to change as long as I'm within the relevant range. So this $20,000 gets spread out by twice as many units. Okay, so if I just look at my fixed cost per unit, what happens to my fixed cost per unit? Well, my fixed cost per unit here, 20,000 divided by 10,000 is $2 per unit. At 20,000, 20,000 divided by 20,000 is $1 per unit. So my fixed cost per unit is falling because I'm have the same amount of cost, but I'm spreading it out over more units. Okay, so when you think about variable cost and fixed cost, okay, my variable cost is going to increase as my production increases. Okay, and you see that here, my variable cost is going up, 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 up. But my fixed cost is going to stay the same. It's going to stay flat. Okay, so when you're thinking about the way a cost behaves, I want you to think about a fixed cost as a cost that decreases per unit the more units you make. Okay, so that's going to go down. So let's do one more. Let's do 40,000. What happens at 40,000? I know that's not in the question, but let's take a look at it. Okay, so what happens to my variable cost? Variable cost is still $2 per unit. Okay, the way that I like to think about that is that for variable cost, the rate is fixed, but the total is variable. So I'm going to take $2 per unit times 40,000 units. And just to be consistent here with my colors, that's $80,000. Okay. Remember that my fixed cost is fixed in total, so that means that that is not going to change. So that's 20,000. Okay, so that's going to stay the same. So then my total cost for 40,000 units is $100,000. Okay, so now if I look at my per unit cost, 100,000 divided by 40,000 units is $2.50 per unit. Okay, so see my total cost per unit is dropping because my fixed cost per unit, if I take 20,000 divided by 40,000, my fixed cost per unit is 50 cents. Okay, so my variable cost, variable per unit, is always $2, right? That's not changing. The thing that is changing is my fixed cost per unit's decreasing. Okay, so I hope that helps your understanding a little bit when you're talking about variable costs and fixed costs and how those costs behave both in total and on a unit level as you are as you're doing the calculations. So I hope you liked this video. If you did, please like it, leave a comment. You can also, for more information on either financial or managerial accounting, you can visit accountinginfocus.com. That is accountinginfocus.com. Thanks so much. Have a great day.